USA troops to Ukraine. What Zelenskyy thinks. The date is December 30, 2025, and, well, major peace talks involving Washington, Kiev, and Moscow have reached a real hair-trigger moment. We are facing these competing proposals for what the next generation of European security should even look like. And all of this is happening while the specter of military escalation, real or maybe manufactured, is looming large.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? I mean, diplomacy is supposedly moving forward, but the terms being discussed are just. They're fundamentally irreconcilable. The focus isn't really on if a peace deal can be signed anymore. It's shifted to Europe's almost frantic effort to build a credible deterrent, especially when the U.S. security commitment seems to be shifting right beneath their feet.
That's exactly right. So our mission today is to really analyze the whirlwind of the last 72 hours. We've got the high-level calls between President Trump, President Zelenskyy, and President Putin, the stark differences between the U.S. and the Ukrainian peace proposals. And then there's Europe's accelerated strategic planning, this so-called coalition of the willing. We need to cut through all the diplomatic fog and figure out what peace actually looks like for Kyiv and why Moscow seems so determined to undermine the whole thing.
Before we get into all that, though, a quick word for everyone listening.
Yes.
If you value this kind of analysis, please subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports.
I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today, today we're going to cover exactly what is happening behind the closed doors of this supposed diplomatic push.
And this is such a crucial deep dive for anyone trying to understand, the next 5 years of European security. These negotiations, they're not about some theoretical land swaps. They hold some really dramatic, tangible conflicts that show you the depth of this crisis for Ukraine and its partners.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate tensions, the things that are keeping strategic planners awake right now globally. First, this core disconnect on guarantees. The U.S. is offering Ukraine a security guarantee of 15 years.
15 years.
But Kyiv is demanding a commitment of up to 50 years to genuinely deter future aggression. That 35-year gap tells you everything you need to know about the trust deficit.
It's huge. And second, there's a massively controversial component tucked into these draft peace plans, which is an imposed cap on the size of Ukraine's future army. The number is currently sitting around 800,000 personnel.
A ceiling.
A ceiling, imposed on a country that is currently fighting a 600-mile war of survival.
And finally, the moment the volatility just peaked. Russia claimed Ukraine targeted President Putin's residence with a massive swarm of 91 long-range drones.
91.
Right after the U.S.-Ukraine talk. And immediately, they threatened to harden their negotiating position. I mean, this is military escalation being used explicitly to manipulate diplomacy.
Okay, so let's unpack this timeline, because we are looking at a hyper-condensed few days.
Very condensed.
On December 28th, you have President Trump hosting President Zelenskyy in Florida. And the White House line is that they were closer than ever before to a settlement.
Right. And then the very next day, December 29th, Trump and Putin speak by phone. So the expectation, in the media and everywhere else was that a ceasefire announcement was imminent.
And that's exactly the moment Russia chose to disrupt the entire process. I mean, immediately following those high-level talks, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov makes this massive, almost unbelievable claim.
The drone claim.
Yeah, that Ukraine had launched 91 long-range drones targeting Putin's residence in Novgorod Oblast, which is likely the Valdai residence.
It's a stunning claim. But wait, if the claim is largely baseless, and evidence suggests it is, why would Moscow risk its credibility by bringing it up in a presidential call? I mean, doesn't that just scream that their goal was simply to stall whatever progress was made in Florida?
Oh, absolutely. Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov confirmed that Putin told Trump about the alleged strike, and then Moscow immediately stated they would reconsider and harden their negotiating stance.
And they promised a serious response.
A serious response, and they threatened retaliatory strikes against Kyiv's and government buildings. And you have to take that threat seriously because Russia already targeted the Cabinet of Ministers building in Kyiv back in September of 2025.
For his part, Zelenskyy immediately refuted it, called it another lie, a blatant attempt to undermine the peace process because Moscow was unnerved by the perceived progress.
And a source close to French President Macron even backed this up, stating there was no evidence to support the Russian claims about this specific large-scale strike.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture.
The picture is one of fundamental distrust. Russia has a clear long-term pattern here. They use military escalation, or in this case, a fabricated escalation, to undermine diplomacy and extract concessions.
Right. They intensify strikes, especially on civilian infrastructure, right before talks.
Exactly. To force the victim to negotiate from a weaker position, it is condition setting at its most aggressive.
And that aggressive posturing, it just bleeds directly into the fundamental conflict we see embedded within the draft peace proposals themselves.
It really does.
So the core tension, it remains non-negotiable for Kyiv. It's about land and sovereignty. Zelenskyy was crystal clear that Ukraine would never, ever accept ceding any Ukrainian territory.
Yeah, he emphasized that any solution has to fully involve Ukraine, preserve its sovereignty, and crucially, guarantee long-term security against a repeat invasion.
And that's where the draft U.S. plan, this 28-point proposal, created, well, major political shockwaves. Analysts all over describe the plan as deeply unbalanced, untenable for Kyiv.
I mean, U.S. negotiators probably saw it as politically expedient, a way to get a quick settlement, but the sources show it was far more favorable to Moscow.
Let's just look at the doublespeak in that U.S. draft. So, point 1 confirmed Ukraine's sovereignty. Okay, fine.
Sounds good on paper.
But then point 21, and this is the absolute deal breaker for Kyiv. It simultaneously mandated recognizing Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk as de facto Russian territory, and freezing the front lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia.
You can't do both. You can't affirm sovereignty while demanding the surrender of territory. It was a total non-starter.
And on top of that, the plan tried to impose these constraints on Ukraine that Russia would never accept for itself.
Like capping Ukraine's army at 600,000 personnel and forbidding NATO membership. And then, for a dose of what feels like political irony, the plan called for Russia to rejoin the G8.
For many in Kyiv, that must have felt like a punchline designed by someone who hasn't checked the news since 2014.
Exactly. So the U.S. proposal was seen by many, including Ukrainian officials, as cutting across core Western principles and just pressuring Kyiv toward capitulation.
Which led to Ukraine providing its own revised framework.
Right.
The 20-point plan.
Right. And Ukraine's revised demands, they maintain that non-negotiable core, reaffirming Kyiv's sovereignty. Non-aggression, but with robust monitoring mechanisms. And a commitment to maintain an 800,000-strong military, which is a compromise number. It's up from the original 600,000, but it's still a ceiling.
And crucially, they tied the deal to rapid EU membership and accelerating a free trade agreement with the U.S.
Yes. And Zelenskyy wants this whole plan approved via national referendum, which would require a 60-day ceasefire first.
So when you look at what the analysts are saying, the common conclusion is, well, it's harsh. Moscow has shown zero willingness for any kind of truce without a full settlement that concedes territory.
There's a Ukrainian political scientist, Oles Lakian, who put it very bluntly. He said these negotiations are currently based on an equality between the aggressor and the victim, which just completely ignores international law and the reality of the war.
And that brings us right to the core problem of securing Ukraine after any theoretical peace deal is signed. If Ukraine accepts a military cap and gives up land, what is the credible security guarantee that stops Russia from just invading again in 5 or 10 years?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Exactly. So what exactly is the U.S. proposing, and why is Ukraine so uneasy about it?
Well, the current U.S. offer is for security guarantees for 15 years. That includes a presence of partners and monitoring mechanisms. Now, that sounds like a strong commitment on paper, but 15 years is simply not a sufficient timeline to rebuild deterrence. Zelenskyy has stated very emphatically he would prefer an American commitment of up to 50 years to truly lock in deterrence for the next 2 generations.
And Trump has only said he would consider extending the 15-year guarantee.
Right. Consider. Yeah. So analyst skepticism is sky high. Many are comparing these Article 5-like guarantees unfavorably to the non-legally binding 1994 Budapest Memorandum.
Which Russia violated in 2014. If it's not legally binding, it's just a nice promise.
It's a piece of paper, and the vagueness on the duration is compounded by the constraint on capability, that military cap.
Let's drill down on that 800,000 figure, even though it's a compromise up from 600,000.
Okay, so Ukraine has a 600-mile active front line. To successfully man that line, to maintain training pipelines, and to implement necessary rotation cycles so soldiers can rest and reserves can train. You need a huge, long-term standing army.
So the cap isn't just a number. It's a planned, slow bleed of defensive capacity.
Precisely. This cap severely constrains Ukraine's ability to regenerate its forces over the next 2 decades, especially when you see Russia actively building toward a 2026 recruitment target of 409,000 new soldiers.
So you're imposing a cap on the victim, but no reciprocal cap on the aggressor.
It strategically favors Moscow if the peace breaks down. It forces Ukraine into a permanent state of strategic disadvantage.
And military experts like retired L-Teen Gen Ben Hodges have voiced this skepticism perfectly. They ask, does anyone seriously believe this administration would respond to a Russian drone attack on Kyiv as if it were an attack on New York or Washington?
That fundamental uncertainty is why Kyiv views anything less than a multi-decade legally binding commitment as just insufficient.
And of course, there's Russia's explicit red line. Moscow has clearly stated it will not accept the deployment in Ukraine of troops from NATO countries.
Right, which directly conflicts with any notion of a real on-the-ground deterrent guaranteed by Western partners.
So, faced with American disengagement, these vague guarantees, an inadequate 15-year timeline, European nations have had to decisively step up. And this is led by Britain and France.
This necessity gave birth to the Coalition of the Willing, or COW, back in March of 2025. And it's now a major geopolitical actor. It includes 35 countries, 2 international organizations. They are actively preparing for Ukraine's post-conflict security.
So what does this all mean for Ukraine's future defense structure?
Well, the COW is designed to provide those robust security guarantees that the U.S. seems hesitant to finalize. And crucially, they plan to deploy a multinational force, Ukraine, the MNFU, but only once hostilities cease.
And the U.S. presence in this arrangement is minimal.
Very minimal. It's limited to air and intelligence support.
So the MNFU,
Mm-hmm.
it has a pretty complex plan structure. It would include a land element, but that's focused on logistics, training, armament specialists, deployed far from the front line.
Right. And it would also feature a mission to secure Ukraine's skies, potentially using Typhoon and other allied jets, and then a naval mission dedicated to demining the Black Sea.
And the command structure for this is already set up.
It is. Initially in Paris, rotating to London after 12 months, and staffed by planners from 30 different nations. It's a massive undertaking. It really represents Europe taking ownership of its continental security for the first time in generations.
But underlying all this military planning is this colossal financial gap. The major reduction in U.S. military assistance. I mean, from $14 billion in previous packages down to just $400 million authorized for 2026-2027. That means the financial burden shifts almost entirely to Europe.
And this is where the policy discussions get frantic. Europe now has to sustain Ukraine and deter Russia at the same time, a capacity it currently struggles to hold.
So they're talking about new financing mechanisms.
Yes, specifically large-scale issuance of EU-backed bonds for defense, and, crucially, using seized Russian sovereign assets, we're talking hundreds of billions, to directly fund Ukraine's long-term defense. Without that funding, the COW plan is just a blueprint without any fuel.
But what's fascinating here is that even with all this planning, there are critical deterrence gaps that are still unresolved.
The core issue, again, is the rules of engagement, who fires back, under what authority, and on what timeline when Russia inevitably probes the post-ceasefire line.
Because they will?
They absolutely will. Military experts warn that a demilitarized zone without a credible deterrent, and that means troops authorized to shoot back immediately, will be seen by Russia as a green light. They all point to the failed Minsk agreements.
So you need soldiers on the ground with real capability.
And the authority to enforce the peace with lethal action. It's similar to the mandate that secured the Dayton Accords in Bosnia decades ago. If the MNFU forces are just logistics and training, then they aren't deterrents, they're targets.
And we saw an almost immediate display of aggressive Russian posturing on this just today, December 30th. Russia announced it had moved nuclear-capable Oreshnik missiles into Belarus.
Which allows those missiles to potentially reach European targets much, much faster from NATO borders like Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia.
This, coupled with the recent Belarusian smuggling balloons violating Polish airspace, it suggests Russia is intensifying what military professionals call Phase Zero condition setting.
Right, which is military jargon for intelligence gathering, positioning assets, and conducting low-level provocations before a kinetic conflict. They're laying the groundwork for potential future action against NATO. It's a clear message to Europe: your deterrence efforts will be met with escalation.
So, to summarize this whole deep dive, we're seeing a fundamental strategic disconnect. The U.S. seems to be pushing for a political win-a-peace deal based on expediency, with President Trump claiming a deal is very close, regardless of the long-term consequences.
And on the other side, you have Ukraine demanding genuine generational security. You see that in their 50-year guarantee request and their absolute rejection of territorial concessions.
Meanwhile, Europe, through this coalition of the willing, is actively preparing for a long-term future where Russian aggression continues no matter what agreement gets signed.
Yeah, and that shifts the focus entirely to who will pay for the enforcement mechanisms, and more importantly, who will enforce them with the authority to actually fight back.
We know Ukraine's position. Borders must not be changed by force. But given that the source material suggests Russia views the U.S. strategy as ideological and revisionist, and Europe is being forced into this massive, urgent position of burden shifting, it raises a really important question. Is the coalition of the willing truly Europe's path to protecting Ukraine, or is it merely accelerating the continent's forced independence from U.S. security leadership? It's something to mull over as we head into the new year.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
And one last time. Oh, subscribe to Defense Reports. It's your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.